This is going to be my review of the, I believe it's pronounced, the Hyaena line spooler. So basically what it is that you connect this to your rod, you put your spool of line in between these two arms, and depending on whether or not you're doing a bait caster or you're doing a spinning reel line fill, depends on whether or not you have two things activated. This wheel here activates the tension of the two arms. On the bottom side of this, there's a little plate that's spring-loaded that gives it a little bit of play. The connector here to go over the rod, it either fits this in this direction here, I don't know how well you can see that, fits in this direction this way, or this direction this way, depending on how big your rod blank is. Bait caster, you'd keep the arms locked in this position here. This little pin back here keeps it locked into that position. There's one here, and then there's a lock pin down underneath here. Loading up a bait caster, that's how you would load that up. Just pull it straight off the line. Now, one of the things that this is supposed to do is it's supposed to reduce line twists and wind knots. So if you were loading a bait caster, what they say is that when you roll it onto the spool, you want it to roll off of this spool the same way it's rolling onto the spool onto your bait caster. That's why you would mount it and leave it in this locked position like this. However, when you're using a spin cast, when it rolls like that, when the spin comes around and the bail's loading the line back onto the spool, it's obviously turning around the spool and it's loading it up that way. If you're loading it the way you would traditionally do it, which I've done it a lot, is load it the old-fashioned way, where you take a pencil and you stick it in between the spool, and you have a friend or somebody help you load that up, and load it on that way. You need to put more tension on it.
Isn't there a better way to do this?
Yeah, that's the traditional way. The way I've always done it, and I got a lot of line twist, and I got a lot of wind knots and everything else, and it made it really difficult when you're fishing. When you're out there and you're casting, there's a little bit of a breeze, or even just not, and you cast out, and as you're bringing it back in, you'll notice there's little twists in your line in between here, or you'll notice little loops sticking out of your spool. They can get really bad. They can get virtually impossible. It slows down your casting, it shortens up your range, and it tends to make it a little bit more unfun to go fishing. One of the ways I did it was I had created I created one of these, made it just out of stuff I had laying around, and the idea behind it was just to be able to stick that on there, stick the spool on that, and then load it onto the reel. Still getting the wind knots, still getting the line twist. And then one day I was looking at a review on YouTube and saw somebody had something like this, only it was connected to the end of a fishing pole, what looked like a fishing pole, and you hook your reel to it, and it would do the same, virtually the same thing. They wanted $40 for it. This one here I found on wish.com for 19 bucks. Now, it is virtually the same thing, it's just a different company's name on it, but it is virtually the same thing, only it doesn't come with a rod. Company that I did see name being passed around, they did have one version like this. They wanted for $25, I believe it was, or $24. This one was $19 on Wish. If you've never been to wish.com, I highly recommend it. It's a great place to go crazy and buy a bunch of stuff you probably don't need. I'm going to go ahead and set this up. I'm going to spool this reel with the line spooler and some 8-pound test I had laying around. Yes, I'm putting 8-pound test on this. I know there's a lot of discerning fishermen out there that say 8 pounds pretty light for a fishing pole and a rod and reel of this size. I'm not big on 50, 60 pound test when I'm fishing freshwater fish in the middle of Iowa that most of the time aren't going to get that big. I'm not going out to the Mississippi and fishing for 30-pound catfish. 8-pound test is more than enough to catch bluegills, crappie, some decent sized bass, and especially if I catch anything over 8 pounds, it makes it a challenge. It really does. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to get it locked in. On this one here, I had to flip it over in order for it to be able to put enough tension on my rod to hold it still, and then I just tighten this little nut down so that way this doesn't roll on me. I want to make sure that it is lined up with my spool, and then I release the tension on this so that I can get this spool in there. So then as I'm tightening this little plate up, it's going to bring the arms together on this spool. I want to give it just enough tension so that way it doesn't come off, for one, and just give it enough tension so that way it doesn't, you know, I'm not putting it on there loosely on the spool. So then I'm going to go ahead and tie this off, and then I'll release the pin here and start the process. Okay, so I've got my line tied off, and I am ready to start spooling this in. So one of the things I want to do is I want to release this pin here. So what you do is you pull it up and lock it into place. And so now that's free to rotate, and this will be free to pull line off, and this will be free to rotate the same direction that the bail is spinning on. The reason why it does this is because now it is supposed to lay the line down flat onto the spool so that it's not it's laying down naturally as that it comes off of this spool, as opposed to twisting it up and you getting that coil and then creating extra line memory onto this spool. So when you go to cast, you get fewer wind knots, and you'll get fewer line twists, and it's supposed to work a lot better for casting distance and everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten up the drag a little bit on this, make sure I'm at a good area, and so then what you want to do is you want to start slow. It might help if I tighten my knot just a little bit tighter, and then as my wife walks across the shot, once it starts going, it should start spinning, so I'm going to hold this straight up and down. Okay, so like I said, it's trial and error, and I figured out that the closer that I put it to the reel, the more it's supposed to do, the more it does what it's supposed to do. You still have to pace it a little bit, but once you get that pace going, and it keeps up with your reel, your bail, you can actually get a good pace going, and it'll lay down the line the way it's supposed to, nice and flat on your spool. Yeah, so again, trial and error. Doesn't mean that it was a poor product, it just means that I had to figure out where to put this in order to make it work right with this reel. I don't know if it has anything to do with the gear ratio on the reel or not. I don't know if it has anything to do with the size of the spool. The instruction manual is pretty sparse, and it's also a translation from Chinese to English, which I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. Anyway, seems to work pretty good. The true test will come from casting. I don't know if anybody's noticed outside, but here in Iowa it's cold. Yeah, this is definitely not fishing weather. It's cold, it's snowy. I'm not much of an ice fisherman. The sound of air bubbles and cracking ice is not my idea of fun. I'm more of a summer, spring, fall fisherman type guy. So when it thaws and the water warms up a little bit and the ice goes away, that's when I'll post a few videos of casting with this bad boy after being fed off of this. So yeah, otherwise my review of this is that probably the best thing to do would be to take it to a local bait shop and have them spool your fishing pole or your fishing reel professionally, if you want to put it that way. They have a machine that does it. They can pick whatever size line you want, put on there. They do have a machine that does it correctly and does it very well. That would probably be my best recommendation, is to take it to a tackle shop and have them do it. If you're frugal and you want to be able to do it yourself, I would suggest getting one of these. I would probably go with, I think it's called the Pisces Fun. You can go cheap like I did and get one of these kind of like a knockoff brand from China. It works. You just have to figure out how to work it in order to get the full benefit of it. I'm pretty sure the Pisces Fun would have worked right off the bat. I've seen a couple other videos where it didn't quite work off the bat, and it took a little bit of a figuring out on how to get it to line up your spool. But once you figure it out, it actually starts to work the way it's supposed to. I'm impressed. Like I said, when I'll find out more in the summer when I'm actually able to go out fishing. The line tie on there is actually nice and tight. The spooling on there is actually nice and tight. It feels natural. It feels like as if it came off here. The couple times when this wasn't spinning the way it was supposed to, when I was pulling the line off after trial and error, I did notice that it was twirling up. I was getting those little loops. I was getting little wind knots and everything else. The line was just twisting up right at my feet. So hopefully that helps with casting. Hopefully that makes it a little bit better, a little bit more of a close to professional, amateur professional line spooling. And like I said, I'll do another video when it warms up of some tests with this pole. $20 from Wish, not a bad investment.